Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Noethling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that will empower you to become that confident leader and take your business and your life to the next level. Today, I am very pleased to welcome Phyllis Leavitt. And let me tell you about Phyllis. She graduated from Antioch University with a master's degree in psychology and counseling in 1989. She co-directed a sexual abuse treatment program called Parents United in Santa Fe, New Mexico, until 1991, and then went into private practice full-time. As a psychotherapist, Phyllis treated children, families, couples, and individuals for 34 years and has worked extensively with abuse and dysfunctional family dynamics, their aftermath, and some of the most important elements for healing. She has published 2 books, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire. And she has a new book now, America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And that's going to be the focus of our talk today. So the theme is A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. Please join me in welcoming my guest, Phyllis Leavitt. Phyllis, so happy to have you with me today.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here with you.
So I always ask 2 simple questions before we get into the meat of things. And the first question is just tell everybody, where do you live? Where do you call home today?
I live in Taos, New Mexico.
Still in New Mexico. And share a bit, we kind of gave the schooling and what you do, but talk about the journey that you had that finally convinced you to write these 3 books, that pivotal moment that really changed your life.
Yeah, well, there probably wasn't one moment, but in a nutshell, I had my own trauma as a young child, and eventually, people didn't go to therapy when I was a kid. It was something that you didn't, even when I had heard about it later on, it was sort of a sign of weakness or you were really messed up or whatever. But by the time I was in my 30s and my life was falling apart, it became a little bit more acceptable to some of the people that I knew. And I decided to go to therapy as kind of I don't know what else to do here.
Yeah.
And it really, really changed my life. And out of that, I made the decision to become a therapist myself because it was just so life-changing for me. And I worked, with many, many children and families and couples and individuals. And, I really was able to see that I was not alone at all. There's a widespread epidemic, really, of emotional abuse and physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, alienation in our society today. People are really suffering very deeply, even though they look many times like they're functioning very well. And then it was from there, it was pretty easy to see that all groupings of people operate on some kind of family dynamic that's either healthy or not, that's either really functional and supportive or abusive and neglectful. And once I saw that, it wasn't a far cry to see that many of the dynamics in the family of America are not healthy for many, many people. And actually, many people get really really harmed and hurt and become symptomatic. And so I took that lens of what happens in a healthy or an unhealthy family, and I looked at America through that lens And it really and this is really the structure of the book, it's not to blame anyone. Most of us come by our wounds pretty honestly, whether we're a victim primarily or a perpetrator. And inside the victim, inside the perpetrator, we generally find an untreated victim.
Yeah.
So for me, it became really an urgent call to try to really help educate the public about the dynamics of the family of America and what we can all do to help us begin to heal the great divides, the escalating violence, which are some of the very things you see in an unhealthy family system on an individual level. So that's really where the book came from.
Mhm.
It was a labor of love, and it feels very urgent that we inform ourselves today with what's going on in our country.
Yeah. So I think you kind of answered this question, but and in some of your interviews, you do take it even further. You talk about that you live in America, it and that's what you spoke about, but it really is beyond America, that it is a global problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just like an individual is part of a family, a country is part of the globe. And so when one person can help to heal themselves, it can very often, very profoundly influence the family dynamic that they're in. And I see great hope for America that if we can adopt some of the most healing principles for our own human relations with one another, that we could be, instrumental in helping build world peace, which I feel that we desperately, desperately need
Mm.
because the stakes are so high.
Yeah. So how can understanding again these family dynamics, what are we looking at? Um,
Yeah.
and what type of therapy do you do that really can heal us and stop the violence?
Yeah. I mean, I talk about something that I labeled my own term, high and low tech human relations. We want everything high tech in our world. We want high tech
Yeah.
phones and cars and medicine and computers and all the technologies. And yet we haven't yet asked for high tech human relations. We seem to settle for fighting and name calling and targeting of more vulnerable populations and blame and retaliation. We seem to settle for that, even though none of us want that in our own
Yeah.
personal lives. And so that disconnect is really a mental health issue that many of us have been taught to believe is an ideological or partisan issue. When in fact, mentally healthy people, whether they're in a family or in a community or in government or in a big business or in a church, mentally healthy people don't assault other people. They don't hate. They don't try to divide people for their own gain. They don't exploit. They don't rape. And yet that disconnect between what we want in our own lives and what we know is highly injurious to any of us as individuals or families, we allow on the largest levels of
Mhm.
society. And then we wonder why we have so many people who are symptomatic, why we have so much addiction, why we have so much crime, why we have so much exploitation and war and targeting of vulnerable people. And it's really not rocket science. If we don't treat the effects of how we treat one another in our homes, and we don't make that a national priority, how we actually deal with conflict is the bottom line. What do we do
Yeah.
when we disagree? Then we're going to just see the ripple effects of dysfunction throughout society, which is what we see and which is so armed and so dangerous today on a global level, not just a national level. And what therapy brings is really helping people sit down and talk, helping people learn the skills for deep listening and building empathy and reaching across their great divides to resolve their issues and reconnect with one another. And the bottom line for that in any good therapy is based in non-judgment and helping people focus on themselves rather than blaming other
Yeah.
people. So the real bottom line for good therapy is, and we don't even say this to people. It just becomes part of the healing process. I don't say this to people, but it's like, how do I become responsible for myself instead
Mm,
of constantly saying, you this, you that, you need to do this, you need to change, you need to do what I want, you need to give me what I want. It's that blame and holding other people responsible when in our own lives, and I know this from my own experience, and I've seen this over and over again with hundreds of clients, that when one person takes responsibility for how they behave, what they say, what they do, and they really reflect on their own behavior with the intention to bring healing and reconnection, it can
mm,
change everything. And it feels so good when
yeah,
you're the recipient of that. And we don't see any of this being role modeled at the highest levels
yeah.
of society. In fact, we see the opposite. And it's, for me, it's tragic. And, our young people are on social media and they see these role models of authoritarianism and violent rhetoric and name calling and targeting of innocent, often people.
Hmm.
Uh, and they're learning this just like we learn from our parents.
Oh, yeah. And, I always used to, as I was mentoring people, talk about the, sometimes people just put masks on to try to act the way that you think people expect you to act. But in those times of stress, your
Right.
natural behavior comes out, what
It's
you've learned subconsciously.
right.
And oftentimes that's not the best version of you.
That's so true. And I think one of the great gifts of psychology, whether we're talking about an individual, a couple, a family, or a country, is we become aware of what that automatic unconscious mechanism is, which we learned,
Yeah.
honestly, as just a way to survive. But for many of us, the way we learn to survive is not functional in our adult relationship life, whether it's to fight or to hide or to disappear or blame or drink. For many of us, that was the best we could do with the role models and the skills that we had. But once that becomes conscious and people are able to heal some of the underlying wounds, I have never seen anybody do that work and become more violent or more hateful or more uncooperative with other people. In fact, I see the opposite. We become more compassionate to ourselves, and then we become more compassionate and cooperative with other people. And we don't do it perfectly. Nobody does. We still have our reactions and sometimes have to talk ourselves down off the ledge.
Yes.
But great, two steps
Yes.
forward, one step back is progress.
Yeah. I love that you talked about the stigma, if you will, regarding mental health and seeking therapy and assistance. I'm 66, and you I was so happy to see some of the actresses who we thought had it all together
Mhm.
come out and say,
Right.
no, I have therapy. I need therapy. Even, Michael Spitz, I think I said that wrong, but the whole thing about, hey, here I am, this tremendous actor, actress, athlete, Simone Biles.
Mhm.
But I still have my moments, and talking out with somebody that's trained is very helpful.
Yes.
I just, we need to get past that, you know?
And I think that's a good example what you bring up because, someone with influence can be a good influence. They can light the way. They can say, like people that we esteem or that we look up to or that we think are a massive success. And then we find out they're vulnerable and they had childhood trauma and they're in therapy. It normalizes healing. And that's what we need to do. We need to normalize that it's normal, it's healthy, it's actually a sign of strength, and it takes courage to reach out for help and learn something new and dive into the depths of our pain with the desire to come out the other side and live a healthier, more constructive, more relational life. And
Yeah,
so,
I love that. I love that you say it's normal because, what we heard and what my parents heard was, well, if you go to a psychiatrist or a therapist, you're crazy. And that's like furthest thing from the truth. You
That's right.
know, uh, it's just so frustrating. Um, what are some of the leading causes for us to have those stressful mental health issues?
I think it all comes down to how we're treated by other people. I've been a therapist for over 30 years, and I can tell you without any doubt that no matter in each person who's come into my office, including myself as a client when I was a client, we all have our own unique story and we have our own unique way of being. And we're all very similar in that our worst symptoms in some way can be traced back to an injury to love and belonging, safe belonging. And
Yeah.
so, if that's the cause, which I've seen over and over and over again, without exception, then the healing is to provide love and safe belonging for each other.
Mhm.
And yet, that's not part of our political agenda.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason why I wrote the book, that one of the biggest things that helps people become safe for themselves, their children, their partners, their employees, their employers, and in their communities and in government is to heal their wounds to love and belonging.
Yeah. Carry a lot of baggage around with us oftentimes.
We do.
So, what are the dynamics of a dysfunctional family that are being played out in America? So,
Yeah.
talk about um, how can how can psychotherapy or psychology heal us, change those dysfunctions? And I think it's first is to recognize. We used to always joke about, oh, everybody has an uncle or an aunt that are dysfunctional, but I mean, really, we don't have a manual for being
Right.
a perfect family, a perfect couple. So, of course, there's going to be some dysfunction, I would think.
Right. And I think there's a lot of intergenerational dysfunction that's just passed down. And so if that's the way you grew up, then that might be the way you treat your kids or your partner without thinking about it. And often without feeling like you have any control to change it. When people are really conditioned to rage when they're angry or isolate when they're hurt, often it's very hard to break those patterns without some kind of intervention and help to heal the underlying wounds. But in a nutshell, and I talk about this in more detail in my book, but in a nutshell, some of the signs of an abusive family are rigid boundaries, unrealistic expectations, excessive punishment, or no boundaries, no limits.
Yeah.
Um, a lack of love, a lot of judgment, targeting one person and rewarding another, silencing people when they really try to call out for help. So often, I can't tell you how many times in my practice I heard people say that when they were hit as a child, they were told, if you cry, I'll hit you more. you
Mhm.
know and so crying is a normal response to being hurt, and yet then abusive people will punish their victims for having a normal response. And we do some of these same things in our society. We
Mhm.
deprive people of resources, of good medical care, of access to good housing or education or a living wage, and then we call them lazy and entitled, rather
Mhm.
than this is a social problem in the family of America. And we know, and this is the reason why I go back and forth between the individual family and the family of America. If you took a family and you looked at one family and they were starving one child and feeding another, if they beat one and they encourage another child to beat that same child, we'd say they were mentally unwell. And yet we do these things as a country without thinking
Mhm.
about it. So, one of the hallmarks of an abusive family is that the person who is abusive justifies what they do. She
Mhm.
deserved it. He
Right.
deserved it. I beat him because he talked back. I molested her because she wore that short skirt, rather than taking responsibility for their own harmful behavior. And we
Mhm.
see these things so often proliferated in larger social settings.
So, what would be some best practices that we as Americans, as humans, maybe is a better way to put it, as humans should do to break the cycle of abuse and
Mm-hmm.
violence, to get us to that point where we start to heal? And I don't think it will be an overnight thing
No,
to.
and it won't, and there's not one thing, but because there's many things. But what I would say is one of the bottom lines that I think the world of psychotherapy and psychology addresses so well is it really helps people sit down and listen to each other and
Mm,
really listen the way that they want to be heard and speak the way they want to be spoken to with a goal for repairing the relationship. We don't even have that as a goal in our country right now. The goal isn't to repair the great divide between red and blue. As far as I can see, the goal seems to be who's going to beat the other person out and suppress them and silence them and shame them and get them off the out of any sense of power. And in the world of psychology, we know that that's not what heals.
mm,
What heals is helping people really feel heard. Everybody thinks they're right. I think I'm right. You probably think you're right in your views. My husband always thinks he's right if we have an argument, right? Um, it's not about one
mm,
person beating out the other, even though that's what we want. When most people come to therapy, even let's just say as a couple, and they really want the therapist to take sides. They really want, one person wants the therapist to say, your husband or your wife is just wrong and you're right and they better listen to you. But we don't do that. We may call out in a non-judgmental and non-blaming way behaviors that are dysfunctional and harmful.
mm, right.
But the goal is to heal. The goal is to help people develop empathy for themselves and the other, to listen deeply and repair the relationship. And that is what's missing, I think, at the highest levels of the family of America. And we all suffer as a result of that. And just like I've told this story so many times, when I first started my practice, I wanted to work with children. That's what I really wanted to do. And so I focused on working with children. But what I found pretty much very quickly was that almost every child, I'd say 99% of the children that were brought for therapy, came because they were suffering from conflict between their parents. So
Yeah,
there wasn't anything wrong with them. They were the symptom bearer for the
yeah,
ongoing unresolved conflict in their home. And once, and not all parents were open to that, but many really were. Once they realized their child was suffering in school or couldn't make friends or was having nightmares or had become aggressive or was obsessed or whatever they were doing, because they felt so insecure and frightened at home, then they were willing to look at themselves and focus on themselves. So pretty soon I stopped working with children, except diagnostically, to come back to the parents and say, what needs to happen is that you either need to really work on resolving the relationship, heal your own wounds that are feeding the problems in your marriage, or separate peacefully. And
mm,
so, to the extent that our leaders are at war with each other and tearing each other apart on a daily basis, we, as the subjects of that kind of a family system in America, are suffering. And I see that all the time.
mm. I work with kids as well, teaching them public speaking and leadership.
Mm.
And what you're saying is absolutely what I've seen over the years is the behavior, the bad behavior that I've seen in the children. When we worked with the parents, you see that same thing. And oftentimes, they don't see anything wrong with it because that's the way that they were treated and their
Exactly.
parents were treated. And it just goes on for generation and generation. And to have the courage and the confidence to say as a young child that it's going to stop with me is really so much to put on a kid. So one of the groups that I work with, we do work with the parents, just as you said, because we know we can do all these wonderful things and they leave after the several hours with us and can't put into practice what they just learned.
Right. Right. And not to minimize, though, the value of you being there outside the system as a reflection of what's going on so that somebody sees beyond the dynamic that they're caught in. Because I think there's a lot of research that shows that some of the people who made it out of the worst family life situations did so because they had at least one other person who stood outside the system and helped them in some way.
Yeah.
So, but yes, the work is in the family, just like it's in the
Mhm.
family of America, for sure.
And I love that you talked about the fact that, we really need to listen to understand. That was probably what promoted me to start to work with kids because
Mm,
they do a 4-minute speech to tell us about themselves and in the classroom, especially. And so for 4 minutes, everybody is just listening to them. And I'm listening to be able to give them feedback. And you could just see that sometimes this is maybe for some of them the first time that anybody listened well enough to tell them what they were doing well and why and how they could improve and why. And it got the students, their fellow students, their classmates to understand them better because,
right,
again, nobody was interrupting. They were patient, they were being attentive. But it also had the teachers who maybe thought that that kid had a chip on their shoulder or was a bad egg or whatever, realized, oh God, you're 13 and this is what's you're going on, what's going on in your life.
right.
Um,
Oh, I think that what you're doing is invaluable because so many people, even as adults, never had that. They never even had anybody that asked them what was going on. What were they feeling? What did they need? What was their life like? I think telling our stories is extremely healing, and it's part of that bridge building. I know that one of the processes that I learned to do with couples was part of the process was to whatever the issue was that had come up between them. After they talked about that at length, they went into a process of just talking about how that related to their upbringing and what they had experienced growing up that was related to what was going on for them that was painful now. And it was such an empathy building exercise because so often people just don't even know what really happened to another person that would set them up to be reactive or shut down or judgmental or frightened or whatever.
So time's running out. So in your book, what from chapter to chapter, do you give them some homework, some guidance, some try this and or is it just stories that will help them understand how you may be able to heal a nation?
It's a combination of a little bit about me, a lot of client case study that are examples of some of the principles and topics that I'm talking about. I spend a lot of time talking about some very large paradigm shifts that I think
Mm.
we make in the world of psychotherapy that would dramatically shift what's going on in the family of America. And I have a whole chapter on the elements of repair that people can apply in their own lives that I also think desperately needed to be employed in our country and at the highest levels of government interaction. Um, and then I talk about very specifically um, peace, safety, and love at the end of the book. And then I have created a PDF that's based on the chapter on repairing relationships when there's conflict that is available through my website. It's free. That is definitely designed for a person's use in their own life. It's a course, it has questions, it has exercises as well as explanations. I just designed a quiz that you can also find on my website. I don't know if it's totally developed yet, but you can look at it. But it should be finished within a week or two, where you can identify your conflict type and understand what the different conflict types are. And then that actually is a good segue to the PDF of how to repair relationships when there's conflict. And then I'm also in the process. I'm not sure when it will be out, but I hope maybe by early next year. I'm making an entire course based on my book so people can
Fantastic.
apply all of the principles in the book to their own lives.
That's awesome. Well, if you, audience, have enjoyed this conversation, intrigued, and want to know more, want to connect with Phyllis to see if she can give you even further guidance. If you're listening, you know the drill. You should go run and get a paper and pencil real quick, or you can go to my website, findyourleadershipconfidence.com, to get the show notes, which will have all this information, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel, Vicki Noethling. So those listening, you know, I will give you the information orally. It is website of Phyllis Leavitt. That's LEAVITT.com. Phyllis Leavitt. Facebook, again, is her name, Phyllis.Leavitt. Instagram is her name, Phyllis-E_Leavitt. So Phyllis E. Leavitt. LinkedIn is Phyllis-Leavitt- a bunch of numbers, don't worry, just search her name and you will find her. Twitter is her name, Phyllis Leavitt 2, the number 2, and YouTube is at Phyllis Leavitt Podcast with an S 1053. Again, Phyllis Leavitt Podcast 1053. I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis. She's going to talk to you a little bit more about that, the information she shared about her website, what you can find on it, and where you might find her most frequently in the area of social media. It's all yours, Phyllis.
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on all of the social media. I have lots of interviews on YouTube, and I have also many interviews on my website. I have some blogs on my website. There's a little bit about my bio. There's information about my earlier 2 books which were really about my own healing journey. And you can contact me through my website. There's there's many places on my website where you can just contact me. And you can also, if you want to, you can email me directly at phyllis@phyllisleavitt.com. And you can get the PDF. You can sign up for my newsletter. And if you have any issue with any of that, just contact me and tell me what you would like, and I'd be happy to get back with you.
Excellent. Phyllis, it's just been so wonderful having this conversation with you. You have a lot of great insights, and I hope that, as I'm sure you do too, that one step, one person at a time will start to change this world to make us heal not only the nation, but find that world peace that you talked about.
Yeah, that's my prayer. So thank you so much for having me here today. I loved talking with you. You had great questions and insights yourself, and I really appreciate all that you do.
Thank you so much. As always, I remind everyone that life is a journey, and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Noethling, signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.